scripted about Huangdi Neijing. This is not going to be edited or anything like that. I'm just going to record it and then I'm going to put it online. And this is the beginning of a project that I'm already planning to do for a long time. I remember the first time when I came to a daoist conference in, I think it was in Boston. Yeah, I think it was in Boston. And I hear everybody talking, and when I started talking and discussing with people the interaction between Taoism and Chinese medicine, and especially the Huangdi Neijing, in most cases people saw this as two completely different separate things. And I said, like, well, look, Taoists are busy with the neidan practice, and in this neidan practice the Huangdi Neijing is elementary. It is not just providing the physiological processes for the alchemical process, but it is also providing at the same time understanding about medicine. And this is the reason why many Taoists, they were also medicine people. And like also in my own school, I practice what I preach, so I teach people neidan, and I do that through both the meditative process as it is being developed from the Ming Dynasty, as well as the old style where we are really going still into the psychoactive aspects of the body, which maybe some people would call psychedelic, you can say, but which are elementary for connecting the person with the divine realm and the beings that live in there. So to say, to prepare yourself for an immortal life. I've done a series called Wilderness on the different kinds of immortals, so I can refer to you for that, because this is also based on the Huangdi Neijing. And I first want to start with this part when we talk about the Huangdi Neijing, because I don't know exactly how much time we have today. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. This is because I have also to bring my kids away to somewhere. This is Huangdi Neijing, of course, in English, but this is in Chinese. This is Huangdi Neijing. Yep, Huangdi Neijing. Remember these characters, because we're going to get back to that eventually. You can make a screenshot otherwise from that image if you look it back, and then you can analyze what I said before. But I think this is going to be fine to watch from where you are now. Huangdi Neijing is very often translated as the medicine classics of the Chinese emperor, and that is not actually completely true. And this is, of course, as a Taoist, I have a little bit of a controversial opinion about Huangdi Neijing as compared to how it is being used in Chinese medicine. That's a very important part, because this is indeed, this is Huang. Huang is the color of the earth, and the earth in that sense is the earth of the Yellow River Basin. Very important part, because it is very fertile ground. So Huang is an indication of fertility. If you look at the Wuxing theory, Huang is also a very important color within the Wuxing theory. And by incident, at this moment in our discussion of I Ching, we are busy with a 2 years counselor course on I Ching, and this 2-year counselor course also going to be available online as a continuous program. You can sign up for that if you want already. Because it is active, and we are in this program, we are discussing all kinds of things, and Huang, one of the things, is part of the core of all the different kind of thing, the different kind of forms and forms of consummation as being discussed in the Huangdi Neijing and all the other classics. Here it is also very important to refer to relationships with other classics, like the Book of Histories, the Book of Documents, the Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi. We can look at the I Ching, of course. Later on we can look at the Huainanzi and many other texts, smaller and more famous and less famous texts from that time, to underscore this. And of course this is a very important part, because this Huang is then indication of, you know, the flourishing because of the fertile soil in which things come. So your health, in that sense, in reference to that, Huangdi was the emperor who was making China flourish. That was the idea anyway. He was a warrior king, actually, so he was not really a medicine person, but in his reign as a warrior, at a certain point he was like, okay, I can create a lot of death, but at the moment when I create a lot of death, I should also know about medicine. And this is why, for instance, a school like Wudang Taoism was being created by the followers of Zhang Zhangfen, because Zhang Zhangfen said the same. Medicine and martial arts, they belong together. They are like one family, and neidan, medicine, martial arts, this is one thing. So Taoist medicine in that sense is the integration of neidan, martial arts and medicine at the same time, but of course also extending them to other forms of medicine, like for instance, how do you run a business, how do you run a country, how do you run your family, and so on and so forth. In a way, you can say that for Chinese history, Taoism was seen as, how do you say, an alternative, from the Song dynasty anyway, as an alternative for Confucian scholarship, but really like as an alternative. So if you did fail as an official, you could always become a Taoist. That was the idea. That means that the term Taoist was a little bit of a insult. Yeah, that's probably the best way. But Huangdi is interesting because it is both ruler, but it also means divinity. Right? It is because of rulership that you become divine. So it means that when you're in control over your own life, you become divine. So if you know how to flourish and rule the flourishing, at that moment Huangdi, in that sense the ruler who makes things flourish, that is you. So the divine ruler, you can say. The Huangdi, similar like Shenong Huangdi and also Fuxi Huangdi, they both had their own realm in which they made flourishing. Fuxi in I Ching studies and Shenong in medicine, of course, also, but also in agriculture, also in neidan studies, and so on and so forth. So these three, they cannot be separated. These three, you do need to study all three, and these are the classical resources for Chinese medicine. So I Ching study without Huangdi, no use. Huangdi study, Huangdi Neijing study without I Ching studies, no use, because you get a fragmented image of how things work. And then of course Shenong is the way how you live through relating with your environment. This is where the neidan things come in, and that means also, for instance, in how you eat, plant and grow the world around you, and that is including your children and your grandparents. Then Nei speaks basically for itself. People say internal, but it's not internal, it is actually a verb. It is both a noun and a verb. That's very typical for Chinese. So Huangdi Neijing, I'm sorry not to get too quick ahead of myself. Nei in that sense is both internal as well as internalizing or going inward, right? So Huangdi inward, right? Then we come to the character of Jing, and this is where it becomes very interesting, because very often this is compared to concepts like sutra and also classics and so on and so forth. And although all these translations are not necessarily wrong, there are a few aspects to it that are very important. For instance, here, this is a part which is called mystery, dark. So there's the hidden parts, the one that's going inward towards the hidden parts, and this is a work where you are trying to investigate yourself. So the whole character in that sense is basically Huangdi internalizing investigation. So that's basically it, right? So it is not necessarily classic, although it is a classic, and it is for a lot of other things. Dao De Jing. Dao De Jing is the investigation of morality. Hua Jing, Nanjing, all these kind of things, they are all basically internalizing text. Well, so now we are at this part. Then Huangdi Neijing. The idea is that it is a compilation of text because of the unification of China, different ideas about medicine from different areas of China, which at the onset was only a relatively small part, say the size of France or something, and then gradually became as big as what we nowadays call the Chinese cultural sphere. But even certainly till the Han Dynasty, China wasn't even that big. It was bigger than Europe. It was as big as Europe maybe, but not bigger than that. So the Huangdi Neijing is a compilation of different kind of text, and this is what I think is very important to realize. And at the moment, when you look at the different kind of chapters of the Huangdi Neijing, they are visions, and you can also see that these visions have been edited and re-edited over time, and they have been compiled, and in the meantime, in the background, through I Ching studies, through other things, book of histories and so on, through re-editing of neidan lore and weidan lore also, of course, very gradually there was this unification of concepts within the Huangdi Neijing, which was completed in the Song dynasty. Look up on the internet when the Song dynasty was exactly, but this is the time when the theory was completed, and we would normally call this then, this is when the Chinese medicine theory as a whole had a holist radiance. This is not Huayan, which people sometimes think, like there's this school for Huayan Daoist medicine. This is a concept from Neo-Confucianism in the Ming dynasty, so this is completely different. That is something else. That means that all the things are connected with each other one way or the other. And it's a little bit of a hierarchical Neo-Confucianist thinking. We get back to that at a certain point in the future when we talk about where the Huangdi Neijing is holist, where it is not. And in that sense, you have to think about holism in a different way than in the West, because the Chinese holism is more like a pyramid, you can say, and then from there it spreads out again, going upward. The upward one is the heavenly realms, and then the emperor is there in the middle, and from there there's this division of things, which normally you would call the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things, this is where we belong. The 10,000 things usually in the West is described as a 10 with 3 zeros, a 10 with 3 zeros, but in Chinese it is described as a 1 with 4 zeros. And although all the translators pass by on that, they also pass by on the significance of this, because 1 is the number for unity, for wholeness, for life, and 4, or the 4 times ling, the number 4 sounds the same as death, and for Taoist that is a very important part. So the number 4 is like death, and it's also 4 zeros, so that means basically the absoluteness of death. So 4 times this is ling, 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 ling. Yes, 4 links, and that means that when you talk about the 10,000 things, where life and death are in opposition to each other, and this is like a yin and yang, and the Huangdi Neijing is about that. When you look at the first chapter of the Huangdi Neijing, you can clearly see that the Huangdi Neijing separates itself. One part goes towards what you can call the what's the best way to call to what you should do when you are healthy. This is where we talk about when we do neidan and when we do tai chi, kung fu, and so on and so forth, where we are trying to flourish as living creatures and try to live as long as possible, preferably never die, and also become the emperor of our life. That's a very important part. I will have to make a separate video on that part at a certain point. And you can see in that sense that in spite of all the militarism, pomp, and authoritarianism of Chinese history, at the same time Taoism is more like the anarchistic little brother of the empire, you can say. People retreat in the mountains because the empire doesn't have so much influence on them, and for medicine studies, going into the mountains was very often very important. Look at, for instance, a very famous medicine master called Sun Miao, who was both versed in Taoist studies, Confucian studies, and in Buddhist studies. And Buddhists call him a Buddhist medicine god, the Taoists call him a Taoist medicine god, and the Confucian call him a great medicine master. At the same time, you see that because of that growth in his profession, he had to retreat because he had too many people all the time trying to get his attention. So he retreated very deep into the mountains, and I've been initiated in the Sun Miao Pai, actually. So that story for my personal development also is very important. And when you are studying these kind of things, then at that moment, what he did, he retreated back into the mountains, and people who were very serious about learning or about getting better, they would follow him. And for him, it was very clear. You had the level where you really needed help, then you had the level where you were relatively healthy, but you needed to be helped, and you needed to do something, and then eventually, when you were, so to say, healthy, you had to really take control over your health, and as a result of that, you had to, how do you say this, become an immortal. That's the next thing. The Ben Tao Jing about herbs, based on the theories of Shanong, said actually the same. All herbs are classified according to 3 things. All foodstuffs are classified according to these 3 levels, and depending on if you are one of these 3 levels, you are going to need this, or you go need that, or don't need that. And especially for the higher levels, food intake is always associated also with practice, and is part therefore also of bhikkhu, and then that bhikkhu has to eventually become a lifelong thing. And usually we call this fasting, but the bhikkhu is not only the fasting of your food intake, but it means basically reduction, this is what it is, to make sure that your body doesn't get overloaded, but also a reduction of what you look at, what you are doing, and so on and so forth, so that your life eventually only becomes dedicated to developing your relationship with Tao, heaven, earth, and so on, but also that your life in that sense is at the service of Tao, and as a result that all the other things are of lesser importance. Like in my case, because I'm a Taoist, I have a family. Sure, family is important. If I go to my Wudang family members and I would say like, oh, I left my family because I am busy with doing Tao things, they would consider me a bad Taoist, because the Taoist also is obliged to the agreements that he went into. So for a Taoist, or for anybody studying medicine in that sense, there is no way how you can first enter and then exit. Because traditionally you go into it with an oath, you become a Taoist. Of course, nowadays you go to a Chinese medicine school, you learn some tricks, and you go put some needles in a body, or you learn to prescribe some herbs, or you learn to crack a few bones, or manipulate a few muscles, and then you can say, oh, I'm a medicine person. There's all kind of nice titles for it, but in relationship to the art of medicine and the science of medicine in Chinese medicine, and as it is being extrapolated in the Huangdi Neijing, that is very important. So now I'm going to make a circle back to where I started talking about that the Huangdi Neijing is separating in 2 parts. The first part is about where you go to when everything is healthy. This is what I just now talked about. And the other part, that's actually 99% of the Huangdi Neijing, is about what happens when people get sick, and what methods are there available technically, and what do they need to do, what do you need to do, and so on and so forth. So then it explains basically how the body is developed, what it is made of, and where it deviates into. So that's it for today. I think this is already quite a lot. The Huangdi Neijing for the rest has 2 parts. The one is called Suwen. Suwen is basically the basic questions, and Ling Shu is the miraculous pivot, or the where you say the influence of the completeness of reality as it is changing the nature of human bodies and of human life. And that is basically also the role of the therapist. One of the main things about Chinese medicine, where it is actually 100%, 180% in opposition with Western medicine, is that in Chinese medicine, in the Huangdi Neijing, it is clearly stated you have to have a personal relationship with your clients, while in Western medicine you want to avoid that. You have to have a relationship with the client, because it says without a personal relationship with the client, the chances of healing is less, because you are not going to be committed so much to the well-being of your client. You maybe get into it because of the money. Yes, and that is in Taoism is considered a crime, a moral crime. You can't do a profession for the money. You have to do a profession because of your drive to do this. So there you go. When somebody comes to study as a Taoist master, you always first check if somebody is really motivated. If somebody is really motivated, you allow them to go in. People change though, so then at that moment, of course, it is a huge bang in your face when somebody does that. But later on, maybe they change again, and then they restart their studies, because then they have discovered, you know, what they have been learning actually was very valuable and actually helped them a lot in their life. Because everything in Huangdi Neijing, everything in Chinese medicine is very practical, and this is what is most important. So health in that sense is about being responsible for yourself. This is what the Huangdi Neijing basically says in chapter 1, Suwen, and all the other ones are about what you can do to help other people. So let's stop at this part for now. Whenever I have another time, I will make another video, and gradually over time I'm hoping to discuss the whole Huangdi Neijing with you, and then also in relationship to other classics, what they say about the same topic, or how they change, or how in different chapters of the Huangdi Neijing maybe that is being discussed differently. So I will also read from the Huangdi Neijing. I will use mostly the Huangdi Neijing translation from Paul Umschultz. This is the most developed Huangdi Neijing so far. There are some concepts we will come across that I think from a Daoist perspective anyway, and also from a Chinese language perspective and cultural perspective, are not exactly right, but it is the best approximation of the Chinese text as a whole. Traditionally you learn this text together with your teacher. It is written in Old Chinese, very difficult. I would not be able to translate the Huangdi Neijing myself because it's way too much text. So for translation, besides what my teachers told me, I am also dependent to explain to you on the basis of these translations, and then I can explain to you where my teachers deviated from that and how I found in my own clinical practice, in my teaching, in my school, and so on and so on. We actually consider these things and actually, as a result of that, come with different results. So I hope you really enjoyed this video, and then sign up, stimulate us if you like, then make sure that you are also, become a member of our Patreon, even for a few euros, and that will be great.